Now, I have to say, when the President of the United States is calling out your National Guard over the top of local law enforcement saying that they don't need it, that they have things under control, it tends to have an inflaming effect on what's going on the ground, just when local law enforcement and officials are getting things under control. And I think that's what we saw in Los Angeles.
This is the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, yesterday in a congressional committee hearing on sanctuary cities and sanctuary states and the absolute devastation that they bring on the United States of America. And here he is saying that when a president calls in the National Guard and local police forces don't need it, and in fact they have the situation under control, that president's actions can actually be inflammatory to the situation. But there's a couple issues with that. Namely, on Sunday night, the LAPD chief, Jim McConnell, gave a press conference in which he said that LAPD was, quote, overwhelmed.
We are overwhelmed as far as the number of people out there engaged in this type of activity and the type of things that they're doing. They'll take backpacks, and the backpack will have a cinder block in it. They have a hammer, and they'll break up the cinder block and use that, pass it around to throw at officers.
Okay, and that rioters were throwing commercial-grade fireworks at them. And he said that this entire thing had been violent since the first day, which would have been Friday, and that it had gotten progressively more violent throughout Saturday and on Sunday.
People are worried about the violence that we're seeing. This violence that I've seen is disgusting. It's escalated now since the beginning of this incident. What we saw the first night was bad. What we've seen subsequent to that is getting increasingly worse and more violent.
So that doesn't really sound like the police had it under control. And listen, I'm not saying that the police chief wanted the National Guard, asked for the National Guard. I'm not saying any of that, okay? But I am saying that he used the word overwhelmed. And I can tell you that as an Angelino, hearing your local police chief use the word overwhelmed, say that we are overwhelmed, that does not give you any confidence that the police are going to be there if you need them, or that they have this situation under control. And in fact, they didn't have the situation under control. Earlier that same day, Sunday, I listened as ABC 7 reported on rioters who took over the freeway, completely blocked it for several hours. And they reported that LAPD had put out other calls to other police officers in LAPD asking for backup so that they could take care of this freeway situation, get the people off. But unfortunately, LAPD was strapped too thin.
A lot of calls for help being made initially by LAPD. LAPD was initially requested to help with the freeway situation here as they saw the crowd move towards the freeway. And LAPD noted that they don't have anybody to spare. They've already asked all additional resources to report to the scene in front of the federal building.
Again, does not sound like the situation's under control if we can't get people off a freeway for a couple hours. Doesn't sound like the situation's under control when you have no more officers to respond to the call for backup. Does not sound like the situation is under control. Again, what do I know? I'm not a police officer. I'm not an LAPD, but I'm just listening to what is explicitly said to me, and also watching the images come out of my city. And to compound all of this is the fact that this happened, the freeway takeover on Sunday during the day, and also the press conference on Sunday evening. Both of those things happened after the National Guard was already deployed. The National Guard arrived in Los Angeles around 4 a.m. local time on Sunday morning. So the backup had already gotten here, and the police chief is still calling the LAPD overwhelmed. And they're still not able to get people off the freeway after the backup got here. And please don't tell me that the backup is what caused the violence, that the existence of the National Guard in Los Angeles is what inflamed the violence, because it's not. Because again, the LAPD chief said that it had been violent since the first day, which would have been Friday, and it had gotten progressively more violent. And the National Guard was not federalized by the president until Saturday evening. So during all that time before the National Guard was even a question, it was violent. And in fact, we don't even need the LAPD police chief to tell us that, because we saw it with our own eyes. On Friday, I watched as People threw rocks at moving vehicles driven by law enforcement. I watched as they put their bodies in front of moving vehicles driven by law enforcement. On Friday night, I watched people surround the federal building downtown, try to break in, vandalize it, and also throw things at the police officers guarding the building. So please don't tell me that the National Guard brought the violence with them and inflamed the crowd, because they didn't. It's not what happened. And so again, we're talking about local police being overwhelmed even after the backup arrives. It doesn't sound like the police had it under control. And I'm questioning whether they still have it under control, because what the National Guard did when they came to LA, they were not doing crowd control. They were not stepping in and running with the police and doing everything the police do. They were surrounding the federal building in Los Angeles. They were protecting federal property and federal agents. That's all they were allowed to do. So they're a minimal backup, and it is helpful because that frees up the police to do other things around the city instead of guarding the federal building. That is helpful. But they're really not doing everything that a cop can or should do. And the mere existence of the National Guard surrounding the federal building in downtown should not inflame you to the point where you act like an animal. So this whole rhetoric around, deploying the National Guard is incendiary. Well, first of all, it was violent before, as we just went through. And second of all, the mere existence of the National Guard surrounding the federal building that you were trying to break into should not cause you to behave like an animal. Okay? So any which way you slice it, this entire thing just isn't adding up. But please, please, please keep demonizing Trump, okay? We'll see how peaceful Saturday is, because honestly, I have my doubts. I have my doubts. And I have my doubts that LAPD, God bless them, I have my doubts that the situation is going to be under control.